Hey, Larken Rose here, and I want to do a quick video about something that's good news that a bunch of pro-freedom people see as bad news. As I've mentioned before, the battle between freedom and authoritarianism is kind of like a chess game in a lot of ways. And people who don't know chess, who are watching a chess game happen, may not really have any idea of like who's winning or what to think about anything. For example, if one side like charges ahead with their queen all the way over to the other end, it may mean because they have a cool surprise attack that's going to be devastating, or it may be because they're stupid and they're overextending. It looks like a big aggressive move, and so you think, oh my gosh, they're so bold, and they must be feeling empowered, and they must be winning. And no, in chess, if you overextend a piece, you're probably going to lose it. And basically, the parasites in Illinois right now just massively overextended a piece. They passed, and the governor signed into law, because magic scribbles, a thing banning let's see if I can get this right, arbitrary bogus garbage, banning the sale of assault weapons, a made-up term to demonize a bunch of semi-automatic firearms, and saying, well, if you have them now, you can keep them, but you have to register them by, I think, 2024 or something. So it's registration, so it isn't gun confiscation outright, because they knew that would fail horribly. But it's you have to register them, and you can't sell them anymore. And you can't sell high-capacity magazines. And by high-capacity magazines, I mean normal-capacity magazines, like anything over 10 rounds. Like, if you have an AR or an AK or lots of other things, that's not high-capacity, that's normal to have 30-round mags. So, why is that good news? That they're trying to, once again, disarm the victim class so they can't resist authoritarianism. And at the moment, I'm not even going to get into the ridiculousness and the patent absurdity of all gun control and why it's never, ever, ever designed to protect you or to reduce crime. It's to make the victim class easier to oppress because they won't resist. But I don't even care about that issue for this video. It's when people see them trying something this ridiculous, they go, oh, this is horrible, this is dreadful, the government would try this. No, it's not. This is outstanding. This is hilarious. Why do I say that? It's not that it's okay that they're trying it, but it's hilarious that they so quickly overextended, because the result was that within a few days, the vast majority of the county sheriffs, I think there's a little bit over 100 counties across all of Illinois, the vast majority of sheriffs have not just quietly behind the scenes, but publicly come out and said, this is unconstitutional, we're not enforcing this. None of the sheriff's departments are. Now, I think there were two, probably near Chicago, that said, yeah, we're going to enforce it. Good luck with that. But the vast majority have already come out publicly and said, we're not going to do it. Now, if you don't understand how the chess game works and what the actual goal, like in chess, if you're like looking at pieces moving around and you don't really know what the goal is to trap the king. You trap the king, checkmate, you win. Nothing else matters. That is the ultimate goal. The battle between authoritarianism and state and freedom is the battle inside people's minds for whether they believe they have an obligation to bow to a supposed authority or not. The effect of whether they believe that is authoritarianism and government control. But if the people don't believe it anymore, the government has no control. So if you look at government trying to grab control over something like this, we're going to ban this and you have to register this, like the classic cliche fascist attempt to regulate and ban right. You may very well think they're being powerful. No, they did something colossally stupid. And from their vantage point, this was colossally stupid compared to them not even trying it. Because, and I've said this before, the worst thing you can possibly do if you're a tyrant trying to maintain control is do something that teaches your subjects how to say no to you. Teaches them to resist and disobey, whether passively or actively or violently or whatever. If you push them so far that they disobey, you are undoing the one thing that matters if you're trying to be their tyrant, which is their feeling of obligation to obey you. If they lose that, you, as the tyrant, lose everything. Now, humanity gains, freedom gains, I'm all in favor of it. But if you're the tyrant, you're an idiot if you make a move that results in a bunch of your subjects saying, we're not going to go along with this, we're going to disobey. But one step worse than that is if you're so stupid that you're a tyrant that issues a decree that's so obnoxious that a huge number of your own enforcers say, yeah, we're not doing that. We're not enforcing that garbage. Nice joke. Because, and again, this gets down to the belief and the psychology, and ultimately that's what matters. The legislation, who gives a damn? If there's a scribble on paper, that doesn't mean anything unless the people think that that means something. Because if the people go, oh, you can scribble whatever you want, we're not going to obey. And if their own enforcers say, you can scribble whatever you want, but we're not enforcing that, then it isn't anything. That is the best way to demolish the perceived legitimacy of legislative authority, is to have the enforcers, not just the victims of it, but the enforcers say, this is ridiculous, this is unconstitutional, this is illegal, this is bogus, this is illegitimate. That's their enforcers saying that, and then saying, we're not going to enforce this because it's bogus and evil. It's just, if you're the tyrant and you just did that, there's so many levels. I want to quick mention, I mean, I could rant about it for hours, but I'll make this short. But there's one thing I have to mention about the Stanley Milgram experiments. Most of you are familiar with my stuff, are familiar with Stanley Milgram's experiments and his book called Obedience to Authority. Very short version is that he basically wanted to see how many people would electrocute a complete stranger because an authority figure told them to. Not even government, not even law, not even threatening, not even coercing them into, but just an authority figure said, you must do this. And the sad reality is that more than half of the people would administer to a complete stranger what they thought was a very painful, maybe even deadly shock to a complete stranger because an authority figure told them to. I highly suggest reading the book Obedience to Authority, and various people have done variations on the experiment since then with similar results. So, why do I bring that up? Because people are stupidly obedient. Yeah, but Milgram then did a whole bunch of variations on the experiment to see, well, what has an effect on how obedient they're going to be? Like, does proximity to your victim make a difference? And he's like, well, a little bit, but not very much. Does the sex of the one, male and female, are females more likely to be compassionate and not do it? Nope, they're just as likely to obey and inflict harm. So he was testing a whole bunch of things, and he did a bunch of variations on the test. Well, one of the variations, so again, more than half of the people obeyed stuff they knew was wrong, and often they would like tremble and ask to be allowed to stop and cry, and like they knew it was wrong. They didn't want to be doing it, but they were so indoctrinated into the idea that obedience is a virtue, because that's what our culture teaches, that they would keep doing it, knowing full well it was wrong and feeling bad about it while thinking they were electrocuting somebody. However, one of the variations of the experiment is when Milgram had two authority figures there in their lab coats looking very scientific, and one of them said, yeah, you have to press the button and turn the dial and it must continue, and the other authority figure said, no, I think this is going too far. I think we should stop. Everybody stops electrocuting when there are two conflicting authorities. When one says do this and one says don't do this, everybody says, well, I'm not going to do that, because at that point they're in equilibrium. There's a balance between, well, this one's telling me to do it, that one's telling me not to, so I can't just obey authority. They're saying conflicting things. Oh no, now I have to like be a human being and use my conscience. well, I don't really like electrocuting complete strangers, so I'm not going to anymore. It was like, I think it was literally every single person. If not, it was really close. Everybody stopped electrocuting the person when there were conflicting messages from authority. Well, guess what just happened in Illinois? One group of parasitic politicians said, you have to register these and you're not allowed to blah, blah. And their enforcer said, no, you don't. And it's particularly significant that those are the guys who would go and punish you if you didn't. The politicians aren't coming to your house for your guns. They're not that stupid. They send other people to steal them on their behalf. Well, if the people they were going to send are like, we're not doing that. And by the way, I know full well that sometimes it isn't because the sheriffs are noble and righteous. It's just because they don't want to get their heads blown off. And they know damn well that if they push it too far, there are enough gun owners that will just shoot them. But they don't come out and say, we don't want to get our heads blown off. They come out and say, this is unconstitutional, blah, blah, blah. So, do some mean well and believe that? Probably. I don't know. Are some just scared of getting their heads blown off? Probably. Is there probably a bunch of them who it's a little bit of both? Yeah, but I don't care why they're saying we're not doing this. It's bogus. The fact that they are publicly saying, not just, oh, we don't really enforce that, because there are a lot of bogus laws that certain cops will be like, I'm not going to arrest you for like having a little bit of pot. I know I'm supposed to, but I'm not. That's been around forever. But for the sheriff, the top law enforcement official in a county, to come out and publicly say, yeah, we ain't doing that. We're not enforcing that garbage that the governor just signed into law. In other words, saying that is now state law. And as the enforcers, we're not gonna enforce it. That's even better than two conflicting authorities saying you have to and saying, you probably shouldn't. Because it's the ones who actually put into effect, to enforce it, who say, no, you don't have to do that. And don't worry, they're not going to enforce anything. They're lazy, scared, wussy politicians who don't dare to do anything themselves. We're their enforcers, and we're not doing that. So aside from just the practical thing of, oh, cool, well, then I can keep doing this, and the guys who would have enforced it just said they're not going to enforce it, there's a psychological level that is way more profound, because when a normal law-abiding taxpayer, someone who takes pride in obeying the law, hears from the law enforcers, this is bogus and unconstitutional and we're not doing it, that makes their brain have to go to the uncomfortable place of, wait, so if there's a law and it's bogus, we should disobey it and ignore it? Like, the law enforcers just told us to disobey the law and that they're not going to enforce it. I mean, they basically told us we can disobey the law because the law is bogus. Nothing is more powerful a message to freedom than people realizing those politicians wrote a law and I don't care. I don't have any obligation to obey that arbitrary crap. Yeehaw! When you have the law enforcers spreading the idea that you don't have to obey their arbitrary crap, even though it's only, a small segment of their arbitrary crap because the sheriffs are still enforcing a whole bunch of other bogus, immoral garbage. So they're not really the good guys, except in this select little narrow case. But to have people thinking at all about the idea of, oh, well, that's the law, but heck with the law. It's bogus, let's disobey. That is the most important step that people have to go through to become voluntarists. To realize that when authority is wrong, they're not authority anymore. Authority means the people who have the right to rule, which means, on the other side, it means you have an obligation to obey because they have the moral right to rule. Not just the ability to boss people around, but the right to rule, which means you have an obligation to obey. Well, the moment you say, I don't have to obey that, I'm not obligated to obey that, whether you know it or not, you just said, you're not authority. You're just some guy. You're some guy who told me to do something and I don't have to do it, which by definition means you're not authority anymore in my mind. And that is the only place authority exists, is in the imagination of the victims of it. When the people come along and say, we have the right to steal your money and boss you around, if everyone else goes, no, you don't, you're just some psycho, they have no authority. Authority is in the eye of the beholder, or the mind of the duped, depending on how you want to put it. But here you have a situation, and it isn't just like one or two. Like that happened a lot with the lockdowns, like in Arizona and Texas and a bunch of different places. There were sheriffs that came out and said, that's bogus. You have no right to do that. We're not doing lockdowns. Like I know the governor just said we are, but we're not enforcing that. We're not playing that. That's stupid and bogus. But now you have the vast majority. You can look up the map of Illinois and see how many sheriffs. It's the vast majority of the state. The vast majority of sheriffs came out and said, we're not enforcing this. This is bogus and unconstitutional. So whether or not people, most people aren't philosophically reasoning this out and thinking at this level, but on a subconscious level, what the people hear when they see that, and even the mainstream media had to mention the story of, all the sheriffs are saying we're not enforcing that. And of course the media can go, oh, how dare you? Well, you can say whatever you want, but the subliminal message, which isn't even that subliminal, that's going to occur to people even if it doesn't make it to the level of like a conscious, rationally thought out conclusion is, oh, sometimes you don't have to obey the law because sometimes the law is bogus. Sometimes you don't have to obey authority. Sometimes it's okay to be a lawbreaker. Sometimes it's okay to be, in their eyes, a criminal, which means the criminals aren't always the bad guys. People who hurt other people are the bad guys, and they will call them criminals. But just disobeying their arbitrary BS doesn't necessarily make me a bad guy. And the guys with badges are telling me this. The guys who would have enforced it are telling me. Again, most of this is happening at a subconscious level, and people don't think it out this much. Although I encourage you to go help them think it out this much. Because it's a fine example. I mean, for Candles in the Dark, that for anyone in Illinois that just handed you a perfect opening, if the governor says you have to do this, and the enforcers say that's bogus, do you think you're morally obligated to obey when there's a conflict? And most people are going to go, wow, which is amazing because most of the time, as long as all of authority is on the same page, people go, of course you have to obey the law. I'm a proud law-abiding taxpayer, and I've been trained to think that makes me virtuous, that I bow to a bunch of psychopaths and give them my money. Which, of course, it doesn't, but that's the indoctrination. The state is unindoctrinating people for us by pushing laws. There's even an Einstein quote. I think it was about prohibition, like nothing demolishes the apparent legit. This is way off. This is not a direct quote, but nothing demolishes the apparent legitimacy of law as keeping a law on the books that can't be enforced. And that was about alcohol prohibition when that game was falling apart. Now, he may have meant it in the sense of, oh, we need to keep our laws respectable. It's like, okay, maybe that was your intent. But either way, it makes the point that if people go, yeah, we're going to disobey and there's nothing you can do about it and we don't feel bad about it, that is the collapse of authoritarianism in the minds of the people, and that's what matters. It isn't what garbage they write on paper. It's whether the people feel an obligation to obey. Because if nobody feels an obligation to obey, including the enforcers, who cares what they write? Now it's just some psycho in a room writing down paper and put him in a straitjacket and he can babble in a corner to himself about how important he is, but he doesn't matter because nobody thinks he matters. All of their power comes from the victims who imagine their power to be legitimate. And that's falling apart right and left. And the dumbasses in Illinois just kicked themselves in the butt by passing a law that even a bunch of their enforcers were saying, yeah, this is bogus. This is illegitimate. We're not enforcing this. Hey, everybody, you don't have to obey this. I know he just signed it into law. It is state law. But we, the enforcers, are saying, it's still stupid and bogus. The idea of even thinking for yourself, wait, so maybe I get to decide which laws are legitimate and which I'm obligated to. Like, I can decide, yeah, murder is illegal, but murder's bad. Like, I'm not going to murder if I can technically get away with it because it's bad, but I didn't need politicians to tell me bad. But when they write this arbitrary law and tell me to do whatever, you mean I can just decide that's stupid and illegitimate and I don't have an obligation to obey? I might still obey to avoid their thugs beating me up, but if the thugs who would have beaten me up are the ones coming out and saying, we're not going to beat you up if you disobey that arbitrary BS, authority collapses. And the belief, I've only said this 8 billion times, I know I'm beating a dead horse, the belief in authority is the entire problem. because the big scary government and all its armies, it all rests on the belief in authority. It's like unplugging a giant monster. If you do away with the belief in authority with the peasantry, the normal people, all of that evaporates. They don't have any power. Well, how would you resist a big tyrant with an army? What army? If nobody thinks his commands are legitimate, he doesn't have an army. You think he's going to do it himself? He's hiding in a cushy house somewhere, letting thugs do it for him. The day the thugs go, yeah, we're not doing that for you, he isn't anything anymore. And that's the way we're headed. So the news out of Illinois is outstanding. It's freaking awesome, because it is such a clear example of even the enforcers going, this has gone too far. You don't have to obey that. We're not enforcing that. Which is massive on a psychological level, because most people have been trained to never even consider the possibility that being a lawbreaker is sometimes the right thing to do, which it totally is. Now, sometimes it totally isn't. Like murdering people and stealing stuff is against the law. It's also bad. Don't do it because it's bad. Not because some politicians legislated about it, but because it's bad to commit aggression against other people. It's also bad to commit aggression against other people, even if you have a badge and a law justifying it. But to get people thinking in that direction is the entire challenge. And to have the government forcing people to think in that direction by issuing ridiculous edicts, which would apply to a huge number of people, and then having their enforcers go, no, we're not enforcing that, that's bogus. If I could have one wish of what stupid move I would want the government to do to help wake people up, that would be it. And I actually point that out a lot when they're like the threats of maybe they're going to do a vaccine mandate and say, everybody, you just have to get one. It's like, if they were, I don't think they're dumb enough to try that. If they were, they would very quickly learn that a lot of people have a line. And it doesn't matter if 90% say, yes, sir, right away, sir. If 10% say, no, sir, that's the end of that. Because it only takes a small percentage of the population actually resisting to break any authoritarian empire. Because the people always outnumber the thugs of the state. Like you can't have a ruling class if your ruling class outnumbers the people you're robbing. Like you need to rob them enough to pay for your whole ruling class. You can't have a big empire, a big glorious throne in your huge castle and 7 peasants that you're robbing. Like, oh, I can't pay for my castle anymore and all my stuff. You have to have a huge victim base. So it has to outnumber you if you're the tyrant. Trouble is, if they figure out, wait, we don't really like this anymore, we're not obligated to bow to you, you're done. And now they're helping people think about that. They're forcing people to think about that by issuing commands that normal people and then even the enforcers are saying, yeah, I'm not going along with that. That's ridiculous. And I'm thrilled to see it. Because at the end of the day, what matters is not what words they scribble on paper. It's what is going on between the ears of 7 billion people. And they just forced a whole bunch of people to question, whether they know it or not, to question the underlying notion of authority and the underlying notion that, of course, we're obligated to obey the law. And the enforcers of the law are out there saying, yeah, in this case, you don't have to obey that law. That is massively powerful. That is massive good news. So yeah, it's evil that the psychos are trying it at all. But it's hysterically stupid the way in which they tried it. And it's massively good news that they are forcing even their most devout, obedient subjects to go, wait a minute, do I have to obey it just because they said so? There's like the state of Illinois just did more to kick authority, the belief in authority in the pants than I probably have in my last quarter of a century. And it's outstanding. Don't be scared of them doing drastic moves. They're signs of desperation and they backfire a lot. And there's been a lot of that in the last few years. And it's going to keep happening because they're getting desperate. So when you hear the horror stories of they're going to ban all this, they're going to close all that, no. And if they try, all they will accomplish is teach lots of people how to say, no, screw you. And what the world needs more than anything else is a bunch of people turning towards authority and saying, no, screw you. And we're headed that way. Yeehaw.